Thank you for tuning in to this 20th episode of the Old Code Podcast. I'm your host, the Professor. Today we're talking about a topic which brings in the personal cultivation premise, and we're trying to flesh that out a little bit more, personal stewardship and personal cultivation. But I want to give a context in which how this can take place. So, up front, we're talking about introversion and extroversion, and I find the topic to be fascinating because, again, it reminds us of a certain role we have in society. It reminds us that we are meant to participate in something larger than ourselves, and I want to defend that claim that introversion and extroversion. It's more so about your functioning in a society and in a culture than it is about anything else. Now, in recent years, introversion and extroversion have basically been defined by where do you get your energy? Where do you feel most comfortable? I think there's been a meme online I saw years ago that was like, do you feel most comfortable wrapped up in a blanket, reading a book by a fire, or, snorting cocaine with 30 of your friends? And that's the introvert versus the extrovert image. But I want to clarify that the image of introversion and extroversion seems a bit more simple and a little bit more complicated than just where do you get your energy. Because I've known a lot of very shy extrovert, or the outgoing versus shy type premise. So first of all, doing away with the idea of where do you get your energy. I know a lot of introverts who, yes, they take time to recharge internally by being alone, but I've also known a lot of introverts who are exhausted at the end of the day by just being inside their own heads, and they need to do things which actually externalize them. So oftentimes the introvert can be too internalized, and they need something to bring themselves out. Likewise, the extrovert isn't always necessarily outgoing, and they might even be misanthropic. It almost seems like they are around people for the functionality of it, because they're driven towards being around people. I've known a lot of very outgoing introverts and a lot of shy extroverts. And so I want to get to what I believe to be actually more so the purpose or the function of these traits, and then we can get to the societal purpose. So the purpose of introversion and extroversion is, or the function of introversion and extroversion is internal orientation versus external orientation. In more simplified terms, it's contemplation versus communal in a very real sense. The communal, the contemplative sense isn't just the intellectualist, it's also very often the emotionalist. The contemplative sort tends to be internally oriented in the sense that they are drawing out of the well of their own experience and their own inner world, essentially. They engage with the external world in order to retrieve things for their inner world. Now, this sense of internal orientation is most oftentimes where they feel most comfortable, because engaging in the external world is a bit more exhausting for them. That's one of the reasons why dealing with other people can be a very exhausting thing for introverts, because you're not only dealing with the external world, you're also factoring in the experience or the other inner world that other people have. You're effectively trying to, in the emotional context, if they are paying regard to the other person's inner emotional world, that can be very exhausting, because since the introvert is so attuned to their own inner world, taking into account somebody else's inner emotional life can also be exhausting, especially when they're retrieving that and almost internalizing it themselves. In the intellectual world, dealing with other people's externalizations and then trying to cohere that into that inner world is also incredibly exhausting for some people. And that's one of the reasons why, sorry, I'm adjusting myself in my chair. That's again one of the reasons why it's a bit more exhausting, or why I should say, why people need to learn how to deal with people. Because, well, actually, I'll get to that in a second once I'm done fleshing out this contemplative versus communal, or inner versus external. The extrovert, on the other hand, seems externally oriented in the sense that they're typically more concretely grounded in people and in places. They are acutely aware of the context in which they exist. And again, I want to help people understand the difference between the shy or not necessarily outgoing extrovert, or an introvert. Really, the extrovert is going to be constantly oriented towards that which is external to themselves, whether that's people or situations. People orientation tends to be people who are much more in tune with their emotions. They seem to be much more driven to a communal sense of belonging and making people feel like they themselves are belonging as well. And that seems to be a little bit more of the emotionalist. The more intellectually oriented extrovert seems more concerned with the coherence of systems, external systems, I should say. So they make excellent politicians, essentially. Politicians, and they can be great thinkers. So I'm going to try to keep this episode short because I have a lot of stuff on my plate as of late. It's finals week for my school. And yeah, there's just a lot going on. So I apologize that this episode's going to be a little bit shorter, but so that gives us a groundwork for the function. So think internal versus external. Internally oriented, where are you getting your perception from? And then where are you placing most priority? I myself am quite introverted, but I've also learned how to be outgoing, and part of that has happened because of my theory on the purpose of the introvert versus the extrovert. So finally, that groundwork being laid, the function of the introvert is more so the philosopher or the poet. The function of the extrovert, on the other hand, is more so senator, or I want to say this in another way, senator or elder in a sense. So the philosopher, the aim of the philosopher or the aim of the poet is to make what is internal to themselves, all their contemplations, and to project it into their surroundings for the betterment of their surroundings. And that was, again, the original goal of philosophy. It's the pursuit of wisdom. Pursuit of wisdom is, how do you live a good life? How do you make a life that is worth living? And that's why it's the self-reflective life, or the life examined is the one which is the philosopher's life. They're constantly evaluating their own life in order to try to make it a wise and good life. The same goes with the poet, but instead of the more intellectualist, they're diving into the emotional and even the deeper regions of the self. They are taking their own experience and they're effectively abstracting it so that others can participate and partake in it as well. Now, and I find that absolutely fascinating, really, because if you look at a poet or a poem, what they're doing is they're taking an experience which is distinct to themselves, and yet other people can read it and they externalize it in such a manner that other people can then say, that's my same experience, or that resonates with me. So the goal is to take something which is internal to themselves, externalize it, and that externalization is then brought about for others to internalize that experience as well. And that's pretty consistently what I've seen the goal of introverted externalization. If I'm remembering correctly, there's a quote from goodness, what was his name? Werner Herzog, actually, and he's talking to an interviewer, and he's telling him the only difference between me and you is that I can externalize my dreams. I can put words to my dreams, and if I'm unable to do this, then if I'm unable to complete this project at hand, I am a man without dreams. And he says that he has a duty then to externalize that because it is part of the human experience. So that's, in a nutshell, the function or the purpose of the introverted function. The purpose of the extroverted function is to then take that which is external to themselves, internalize it in order to externalize it once more in a coherent manner. So, like I said, it's the senator, it's a doctor, effectively. It's all of these different things which take what is externally oriented, whether that's people or concepts, like laws or knowledge, they retrieve it into their inner world, and then externalize it for the purpose of imposing it for the sake of order. And order is not just like, it's not just a matter of laws. Order can be nourishing. Order can be taking care of other people. It can be making sure somebody has a meal at the end of the day because they're externally orienting themselves. It can actualize itself in art as well. And that's effectively, again, I should also add, the playwright or the actor is a necessarily extroverted role. They've taken something that somebody else has written or something they've written, they internalize it, and then they externalize it. This even harkens back to the ancient Greek understanding of, and I'm forgetting the word again. Oh my goodness, it's been a long week. I'll include it. I'll say it later. It'll come to me. But effectively, the purpose of Greek theater. Catharsis. There we go. Catharsis is the term. So the purpose of Greek theater was for something that everybody else can participate in. They're taking them along for an emotional journey. And that's what tragedies were meant for. It was allowing people to experience emotions by proxy, which would then allow for this sense of catharsis. It was almost an emotional purging. We still experience this when we go to the movies. If you've walked out of a movie and you go, wow, I feel so many emotions, or I feel inspired to do something, or something along those lines, that is an externalization which has been internalized and which then drives action, which is now external. And this ordering sense is established because people now have a structure in which they can hang these emotions off of, or it's giving a structure to understand the world. It's giving a narrative. So the external and the extroverted function is much more trying to take the external world, make sense of it for the sake of the external, while the introverted function is taking that which is internally oriented, and you're taking bits and bobs from the external world, but the purpose of getting bits and bobs from the external world is for the sake of the inner world. The introvert externalizes it for the sake of the inner world, and even the inner world of others. And that's one of the reasons why you ultimately see there's kind of a uselessness when introverts are incapable of engaging in the external world. It's not just a matter of social ineptitude. It's people who simply either are incapable or refuse to engage with the external world because they've isolated themselves. And the same goes, though, for extroverts who are incapable of that inner digestion, essentially. They are incapable of actually synthesizing something in words for themselves, and they simply become the crowd because all they can comprehend is that which is external to themselves. So why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this primarily because I want people to be able to have an understanding and a structure for self-evaluation and understanding where they belong in terms of the world. I do this podcast because it's my way of externalizing the thoughts and ruminations and the books and the poems and the podcasts that I've listened to, that I've synthesized. So I'm externalizing this so that you can internalize it. The extrovert can then be given an understanding that their job is externally oriented. They are meant to externalize, but their first thing that they need to work on is internalizing data. This also helps in understanding your weak spots. So a lot of introverts aren't very good at externalizing what's internal. A lot of extroverts are not good at internalizing or even dealing with their inner world. It's one of the reasons why a lot of extroverts, especially extroverted men, can be socially or emotionally inept, because they have no idea how to actually deal with the inner world. So that's really what I've got for you today. It's a bit more of just an info dump. I hope that this helps understand a little bit more of where you're at. And I think I've said in this podcast more times than in any other episode. So yeah, this has been the Old Code Podcast. I'm your host, the Professor, and next week I am planning on doing an episode on... I don't think I'll be able to do an episode on Molech. I might do an episode on femininity and masculinity in relation especially to extroversion and introversion. So if you like that idea, let me know. Or if you don't like that idea, also let me know. I appreciate any feedback that you guys give me. I really appreciate everything, all the support that I'm getting from you guys. And that's about it. That's what I got for you today. If you like what you hear, leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, leave a rating, and I hope you have a fantastic day. And That's all I got for you today.